So this is the leaf that they use to wrap the meat in.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
The situation is under control, but we need to remain vigilant.
I understand. What's the next step?
It really depends on the season, you know. Sometimes the early harvest is better.
Yeah, I agree. The flavor profile changes so much.
Yeah.
Well, it's a beautiful day, isn't it?
Yes. Yes, the weather is perfect for a walk.
We should head over to the market soon.
That's I hope, yes. Yes, before it gets too crowded.
So I was thinking about our next trip, maybe somewhere quiet this time.
Oh, that sounds lovely, dear. Where did you have in mind?
I want to get to know my customers on a more personal level.
We should think about redecorating. The place is looking a bit old.
I know, but we have to save up first. It's not cheap.
This particular region has a unique microclimate which allows for the cultivation of rare medicinal herbs.
The morning began not with calm, but with the heaviness of secrets weighing on every breath inside the cramped home. The husband sat hunched at the wooden table, eyes dark with worry, his voice low as if afraid the walls themselves might betray him. "Today," he whispered to his wife, "you must try. If you can't get hair, then a toothbrush, anything of his. We must know the truth. Without proof, we'll never silence the doubt gnawing at us." His wife shifted uneasily, clutching her shawl tighter around her shoulders. She had heard this plea countless times, yet each repetition made her heart hammer louder. The thought of sneaking into Neem's home, of stealing something so personal, filled her with dread. Her mother-in-law sat nearby, eyes sharp with resolve despite her frail frame. "Listen to him," the old woman urged. "Your husband has carried this torment long enough. If Niem truly is the father, then the world must know. And if not, then at least the wound can begin to heal." The weight of generations seemed to press down on the wife's shoulders. She nodded, though fear lingered in her gaze. Outside, the sky threatened rain, a fitting mirror to the storm churning inside the family's heart. The plan was simple on the surface, yet every detail trembled with risk. The wife and her mother-in-law would go to Niam's house under the guise of helping with chores. They would sweep, scrub, and tidy as if driven by kindness, all while keeping sharp eyes for an opportunity. A toothbrush left carelessly on a sink, a strand of hair caught on a comb, anything that could betray the truth, locked away in blood. The mother-in-law promised to keep the conversation flowing, to distract Niam with chatter about debts and gardens, while the younger woman searched. It was a dangerous dance, balancing appearances and intent. Before leaving, the husband caught his wife's hand in his, squeezing tight, his desperation palpable. "Please," he murmured, "do this for me, for us." Every night I lie awake wondering if the blood running through our son's veins is truly mine. This is not just curiosity, it is survival. The truth will decide everything. She looked into his eyes, seeing the raw vulnerability there, the cracks in a man usually so steady. It was enough to harden her resolve, even as fear tightened her chest. The journey to Niam's house was long and heavy, each step echoing like the toll of a bell. The mother-in-law leaned on her hoe for balance, her breath labored but her spirit unbroken. "We've carried debts too long," she muttered. "He once gave us money to pay them, and now look at us, still working, still suffering. Today let us take something back, not money, but truth." The wife walked silently beside her mind racing with what-ifs. What if Niem suspected? What if he caught her searching? What if this fragile plan shattered before it began? When they arrived, Niem greeted them with a guarded smile, his eyes sharp, weighing every movement. "You've come to work again?" he asked, his tone laced with suspicion, but softened by the sight of their tools. The mother-in-law bowed slightly, her voice humble yet steady. "Yes, we thought we could help tidy up. It's the least we can do." He shrugged, letting them in, though his gaze lingered too long. The wife felt sweat bead on her forehead. Every corner of the house seemed to pulse with unseen eyes. They set to work quickly. The mother-in-law swept the yard, her broom scratching against stone, her chatter filling the air like a smokescreen. She spoke of debts, of the endless rain ruining the soil, of sickness that stole her strength. Niem grunted in response, distracted but listening, his attention tugged in different directions. Meanwhile, the wife slipped quietly inside. The house smelled of damp wood and old smoke. Her hands trembled as she wiped tables and straightened shelves, her eyes scanning every surface for the telltale sign of a toothbrush. Her pulse leapt when she spotted it, standing casually in a chipped porcelain cup near the basin. The bristles were worn, bent slightly, still glistening faintly as if used that morning. She hesitated, her breath catching in her throat. To take it would be a theft not of money, not of jewels, but of identity itself. And yet, that was the very prize her husband demanded. With shaking hands, she slipped the toothbrush into the fold of her apron, pressing it tight against her body as though afraid it might scream its betrayal aloud. Back outside, the mother-in-law's face was pale from exertion. Sweat trickled down her brow and her breaths came shallow. "Rest, mother," the wife whispered, but the old woman shook her head. "Not until this is done, not until he thanks us and sends us on our way. Hold steady." Niem emerged then, his eyes flicking between them. He pressed money into their hands, 400,000 dong, a payment for their labor. His voice was clipped. "You've worked hard. Go home before the sun burns hotter." The wife bowed, heart racing, the weight of the stolen object like fire against her ribs. They left quickly, their steps hurried but careful not to betray urgency. Only when they were far from the house did she finally allow herself to breathe. She pulled the toothbrush from her apron, holding it out to her mother-in-law. The old woman's eyes widened, then softened with pride. "You've done well, child. Tonight, we place this in your husband's hands. Then perhaps the truth will finally speak." When they returned home, the husband was waiting, pacing like a caged animal. The moment he saw the toothbrush, his face lit with grim triumph. He snatched it up, clutching it as though it were a sacred relic. "This is it," he whispered, his voice shaking. "This will tell us if I have been lied to my entire life. With this, I will finally know." His wife reached for him, her own voice trembling. "And if the truth is not what you want?" He met her eyes, fire burning in his. "Then I will at least stop living in shadows." As night fell, the family sat together in tense silence. The mother-in-law's breathing was shallow, her hand resting over her weak heart. The wife stared at the flickering oil lamp, her mind trapped between dread and relief. And the husband held the toothbrush like a weapon, already imagining the moment when the lab results would strip away all doubt. Outside, thunder rolled across the horizon, promising storms yet to come. Inside, the storm had already begun, a tempest of truth, betrayal, and the unbearable weight of bloodlines. The night after the toothbrush was taken stretched endlessly, each second dragging like a chain across stone. The husband sat hunched over the small table, the toothbrush sealed carefully in a plastic bag he had begged from a neighbor. He could not stop staring at it, as though the worn bristles might whisper the truth before any laboratory ever touched them. His wife moved quietly around the room, preparing tea she knew he would not drink, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. "You must sleep," she pleaded softly. The lab will not open until morning. But sleep was far from him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Neem's face, smiling, secretive, filled with a defiance that made him sick with doubt. By dawn, he was already at the clinic, the bag pressed to his chest like a forbidden treasure. The technician accepted it with a nod, promising results within the week. A week, 7 days of waiting, 7 days of torment. When he returned home, his wife could see the fire in his eyes, the fire of a man who had set fate in motion and could no longer turn back. "It's done," he said simply, collapsing into his chair. The words carried relief, yet also terror. As days crawled forward, the house grew heavier with silence. The mother-in-law spent her mornings weeding the garden, her bent figure silhouetted against the pale sky. She worked until sweat poured down her wrinkled face, but even then, her hands never slowed. At night, she sat by the window, whispering prayers half forgotten from childhood. She did not speak much of the toothbrush or the test, but her silence carried a weight greater than words. Sometimes the wife caught her gazing at her husband with something like pity, as if she already knew the storm that awaited them. The wife herself was caught between loyalties. At night, when her husband lay restless beside her, she listened to his murmurs, fragments of anger, of longing, of questions that had no answers. During the day, she replayed her visit to Neem's house in her mind. His eyes had been sharp, his demeanor guarded, yet there was something else, too. A flicker of recognition, perhaps guilt, buried deep. Could it be true? Could her husband's torment have a foundation in reality? The thought both frightened and relieved her. Midway through the waiting week, rumors began to stir. A neighbor mentioned seeing Neem talking quietly with strangers outside his home, voices tense, gestures sharp. Another claimed he had been giving money to a young woman in secret. The husband seized on these whispers like fuel for his fire. "You see," he hissed one night, "he hides things. He is not clean. If he could deceive others, why not us? Why not me?" His wife tried to soothe him, but his obsession was no longer containable. On the 5th day, he confronted his wife with a question that chilled her blood. "If the test proves I am not the father," he asked, "will you still stay with me? Or will you say you wasted your life on a man who is not even blood to his own son?" His voice broke on the last word, the pain of years bleeding through. She knelt beside him, her hands gripping his tightly. "You are his father in every way that matters," she whispered fiercely. "Blood is not love. Blood is not sacrifice. Do not let this destroy you." But her words slid off him like water on stone. For him, blood was everything. The mother-in-law overheard and joined the conversation, her tone sharp. "Listen to your wife. Blood is not the only truth. Do you think raising a child, feeding him, protecting him through sickness and storms means nothing? Even if the blood is not yours, the child still carries your care. Do not let this madness turn you into a stranger." But the husband's jaw tightened. "You do not understand, mother. Without blood, I am nothing but a shadow in his life. I need to know." The old woman shook her head, her eyes glistening with both pride and sorrow. The days passed in aching slowness, each moment filled with glances, silences, and the unspoken question that hung over them like a sword. On the 7th day, the husband returned to the clinic. The paper he brought back was folded tightly, his hands trembling as though it burned him. He did not open it at once. Instead, he sat before his wife and mother, the silence stretching unbearably. Finally, with a shuddering breath, he unfolded it. His eyes darted across the lines, and the color drained from his face. The wife's heart stopped. "What does it say?" she whispered, her throat dry. He did not answer. Instead, he thrust the paper onto the table, the letters stark and cruel beneath the lamp's glow. The result was clear: no biological relation. The room erupted in silence, heavier than any scream. The husband's breath came ragged, a sound closer to an animal's growl than human speech. He staggered back, his hands pressed to his head. "No," he whispered. "No, this cannot be. Lies, mistakes. They must have made a mistake." His wife reached for him, but he jerked away, his eyes wild. "You knew," he accused, his voice shaking with rage. "You always knew and kept it from me." Tears sprang to her eyes, but she shook her head desperately. "I did not know. I swear it. I swear on everything I did not know." The mother-in-law stepped forward, her voice steady despite the storm. "It does not change who you are," she said. "It does not erase the years you've given. He is still your son." But the husband was inconsolable. He stormed from the house into the night, his figure swallowed by darkness. That night, the wife lay awake, tears soaking her pillow. She could still hear the echo of his footsteps fading, the crack in his voice as he shouted denial into the empty street. She thought of Niem, of his sly smile, of the secrets buried beneath his silence. Was he laughing now, somewhere in the dark, knowing he had left another family in ruins? The days that followed were fractured. The husband returned, but he was changed, quieter, sharper, consumed by something that gnawed at his soul. He avoided his wife's gaze, barely touched his meals, and spent hours staring at nothing. The son, too young to understand, watched with wide, fearful eyes. The wife tried to bridge the growing chasm, but every word seemed to widen it further. The mother-in-law prayed longer each night, her voice hoarse, as though pleading with the heavens themselves to stitch her family back together. In private moments, the wife began to fear what this truth might awaken. Would her husband seek revenge on Niem? Would he abandon his son, unable to bear the weight of lies? Or worse, would he turn his rage inward, breaking under the pressure of betrayal? Each possibility haunted her like a ghost, leaving her unable to rest. And yet, beneath the despair, a darker question lingered. Was Niem truly the father? Or had fate twisted the truth even further, leaving them all trapped in a maze with no exit? The answer lay buried in the silence of the man who had started it all. And the family knew, whether they wanted it or not, the next step would be to confront Niem once more, this time with undeniable proof. The morning after the results was gray and cold, the kind of dawn that carried no promise of warmth. Inside the house, silence reigned. The husband rose early, his face set in grim determination. He washed his face, dressed with mechanical precision, and tucked the folded DNA result into his pocket as though it were a weapon. His wife knew at once what he intended. "Don't," she whispered, clutching his sleeve. "Don't go to him in this state. You'll regret it." He shook her off gently but firmly. "I have to. I can't live with shadows anymore." His eyes were like stone, unyielding, and she knew nothing could stop him. By midday, he stood outside Niem's modest home. The gate creaked as he pushed it open, each step heavy with the weight of betrayal. Niem emerged from the doorway, his face twisting into surprise, then irritation. "Why are you here again?" he demanded. The husband said nothing at first, only pulled the folded paper from his pocket and thrust it forward. "Explain this." Niem glanced at it briefly, then laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. "So you finally did it. I wondered how long it would take." The laughter cut through the husband like a blade. "You knew," he said, his voice trembling. "All these years you knew." Niem shrugged, his expression unreadable. "I knew nothing. Women talk, memories blur, stories twist. Maybe it's true, maybe not. And even if it is, what of it? Do you think shouting at me will change the past?" The husband's fists clenched, fury surging through him. "You ruined her life. You ruined mine. You left her with nothing but shame and lies, and now you stand here as if none of it matters." His voice cracked, raw with decades of pain. At that moment, his wife appeared, breathless from running, the mother-in-law hobbling behind her. "Stop this!" she cried. She rushed between them, her arms outstretched. Fighting won't heal anything. But the husband could not be calmed. His eyes blazed as he pointed at Niam. He must answer. He must confess what he did. The mother-in-law, her face pale, spoke softly yet firmly. He does not deny because he has no shame. But son, you have something he will never have. Love, loyalty, the child who knows you as father. Do not throw that away for revenge. Niam sneered. Touching words. But tell me, boy, will you still look at that child the same way now that you know? Will you still call him yours when the blood screams otherwise? The cruelty in his tone was deliberate, meant to wound. The husband lunged, but his wife clung to him desperately, sobbing. Please don't let him destroy you. He has already taken enough from us. Don't give him more. Her tears fell hot against his arm, and for the first time, his fury faltered. Seeing the hesitation, Niam turned cold. Go back to your lives. Forget me. I have no interest in your troubles. He turned to retreat inside, but the mother-in-law's voice, sharp and commanding, froze him. Coward, she spat, her frail body trembling with rage. You may deny, you may hide, but the truth will haunt you until your last breath. You abandoned me when I carried your child. You abandoned him now when he needed answers, and you will die with that shame carved into your soul. Her words struck like thunder, and for the first time, Niam's mask cracked. A flicker of guilt, real, undeniable, flashed in his eyes before he slammed the door shut. The family stood in silence, the echo of the door reverberating like a final judgment. The husband's chest heaved, but slowly his anger drained, leaving only exhaustion. He turned to his wife and mother, his voice hoarse. I don't know if I can live with this truth. His wife cupped his face, her tears mingling with his. Then let us live with love instead. Blood cannot guide us, but love can. Our son needs you. I need you. Do not let a man like him decide who you are. Days turned into weeks, and slowly the storm began to settle. The husband remained distant at first, but the boy's laughter, innocent and unknowing, began to chip away at his despair. One evening, as the boy ran into his arms, calling him father with pure joy, something inside him broke open. He wept openly, clutching the child as though anchoring himself to the only truth that mattered. His wife knelt beside them, wrapping her arms around both, and the mother-in-law closed her eyes in quiet prayer. Yet scars remained. The husband could not entirely banish the shadow of betrayal, nor could the wife erase the memory of his accusations. Their love had been tested by fire, and though it survived, it was changed. They spoke less of Niam, as though silence could bury his ghost. But in their hearts, each knew the past would always linger. One evening, under the fading light, the wife asked gently, "Do you regret knowing?" The husband stared into the horizon before answering, "No. The truth hurts, but lies hurt more. At least now I know the enemy. At least now I choose my love freely, not in ignorance." He turned to her, his gaze softening. "And I choose you. I choose our son. No man, no blood can take that from me." She smiled through her tears, her heart swelling with both relief and sorrow. The mother-in-law, overhearing, sighed with weary acceptance. "Then let this be the end," she said. "We cannot rewrite yesterday, but we can shape tomorrow. Let us not waste what little time we have left on bitterness." Her words carried the weight of years, and both husband and wife bowed their heads in agreement. As seasons shifted, the family found a fragile peace. The boy grew, never knowing the storm that had nearly torn his world apart. The husband, though forever scarred, embraced his role as father with renewed devotion. The wife cherished every moment, grateful that love had triumphed over blood. And the mother-in-law, her eyes softer now, watched them with a quiet pride, knowing she had guided them through darkness into light. Somewhere, In another part of the village, Neem lived on, carrying his secrets like stones in his chest. Perhaps he laughed. Perhaps he drank to forget. Perhaps he lay awake at night, haunted by memories of the woman he once loved and the child he abandoned. But whether he felt guilt or not, his absence was no longer a wound. It was simply a scar, a reminder of a past that could no longer dictate their future. And so, though the truth had nearly destroyed them, it also bound them tighter. For in the end, they learned that family is not written in blood, but carved in sacrifice, in loyalty, in love that endures even when the world tries to shatter it. And as they stood together beneath the stars, their hands clasped, their hearts bruised but unbroken, they knew that no secret, no betrayal, no man could ever erase what they had built.